Welcome to the third video looking at topic number 3. To what extent are the residents of Anawati victims of factors beyond their control? Now, before I move on to the key questions, I want to talk about this to what extent. And I'm going to go to the back of the page. Oh no, yeah, I'll go to the back of the page. Alright, to see if I can explain that. We might get some things moving through. So to what extent means that there is a range. Okay, so if we imagine that this was we're brains in a vat and we have absolutely no control over what we are doing, and we're universally controlled by our robot masters, and down here we are gods who have absolute control over the entire universe. To what extent means where in this range do we fit? And what I tend to find with a lot of people who answer these questions is they want to go towards, maybe not as extreme as I've done here, but to what extent do we believe this? They want to go towards the extremes, and I think that's a mistake. You need to decide where in this range you're going to argue. Are you going to argue that they have a lot of control, or not very much control at all? And that's what we need to talk about now. Yeah, I thought it would come through. Oh well, that's all right. We'll use that. So let's have a look at the keywords. Now, the residents of Anawati, again, there's a temptation to underline that, right? But what are the ideas behind the residents of Anawati? It's an important part of the sentence, but it's not something that's idea connected. Victims, I think, is the first word we should really be underlining. What are the victims? What does it mean by being a victim? Yeah, it's a very loaded word, isn't it? So we need to figure out what that means. Factors beyond their control is probably the second one. Okay, and you might have broken them up to maybe factors and then beyond their control, but I'm going to deal with it as one. All right, let's have a look at victims first. So in what sense are the Anawatians victims? Well, they're victims of corruption. Yeah. And they're victims of corruption in two ways. Firstly, they're victims because they are oppressed by corruption. Yeah? So corruption stops them from being able to grow financially, to be able to get them out of the slums, etc., etc., etc. But they're also victims of corruption because it's it's morally corrupting. Yeah, so corruption will inherently, corrupt you. Yeah. So if you're in an environment of corruption, then the only way forward is for you to be corrupt yourself. Yeah, and that kind of, corrupts you morally, I guess. All right. So the second way that they are victims. Global forces. Okay. So, in what way are global forces making them victims? So, maybe due to international economies. Yeah. So because banks in the Western world were selling subprime mortgages, Anawarians were eating rats. You know, and they're victims of this capitalist regime, right? They're victims of this attitude that it's okay for an individual to make money, and hey, some people are going to lose out, but that's not my problem. Okay, but maybe they're also victims of a modern sensibility. Yeah, and this is something we talked about a little bit. So they're having to deal with this move from the traditional caste system that their grandparents would have experienced to more of a modern, or maybe even their great-grandparents, to a modern sensibility of you can improve your station. Previously, everybody, you understood that if you were a Dalit, then there was no way out for you. You were going to stay a Dalit for your entire life. And there might have been some kind of, or at least you might be able to make an argument that, certainly it's argued by some characters in the text, that there is some kind of comfort to that. There is, no way out, so be comfortable and happy in what you have. The modern sensibility says that if you're not rich, you're a loser. If you're not rich, you're not working hard enough. You're not being enterprising enough. You're not being smart enough. And when everything, if it is in fact beyond your control, then this is an illusion. You're just as trapped. A Dalit is just as trapped previously as they are now, except now all of a sudden they feel like they should be better. They feel like they are idiots. They feel like they're, if only they were smarter and better working and X and Y and Z, they would be Donald Trumps too, right? So that's... they are in a sense victims of that outlook, even though ostensibly it seems like it would be a good thing. All right, let's have a look at factors beyond their control. There are probably other ways that they're victims as well, but I'll let you kind of work on that. So, in what sense are these things beyond their control? Let's have a look. So, with corruption, corruption preferences the corrupt. Okay, so corruption preferences the corrupt. So you, if you are not corrupt, you are going to be less powerful than if you were corrupt. So you can't end the corruption unless you want to become corrupt. And by becoming corrupt, you're then therefore part of the problem, right? So it leads to inequality. Which is inherently disempowering. Okay, so when we talk about it being beyond their control, corruption, or to improve their life is inherently beyond their control. Now, secondly, because I do need to speed up a bit, these global forces. Yeah, there's the paradigmatic issues with global forces. They're working within a modern paradigm they don't really fully understand, and they're certainly not able to overcome these global economic and certainly not the economic forces because they don't have the money to do that, but they certainly don't have the paradigmatic understanding that they would need to overcome the issues with global sensibility. Okay, I'm going to end there, but I do want to say there is another way to answer this. And again, when we've talked about this before, when we talked about the 3 ways to escape poverty, and I want you to think about those 3 ways when you make your comments below. See if you can remember what they were and how they could be applied to this question instead.